Okay, so let's dive into one of the most thoroughly documented and frankly disturbing cases of alleged demonic possession in modern history. It's a story that really makes you grapple with the intersection of faith, trauma, and the human mind. So, imagine this. It's 1906 at a remote Catholic mission in South Africa. A 16-year-old girl, Clara Germana Cele, suddenly becomes the center of these terrifying events. And those unearthly sounds Anand described, believe me, that was just the beginning. Right, so this is where it all goes down. St. Michael's Mission in Natal. You have to picture it. A place of really strict religious order dropped right into the middle of a huge cultural collision. You've got European missionaries trying to establish their authority in the Zulu heartland, which, as you can imagine, created a pretty high-pressure environment for everyone there. So how in the world do we unpack a story like this? Well, here's how we're going to do it. We'll start with the incident itself. Then we'll look at all the strange things people reported seeing. We'll cover how the church got involved, but then we're going to explore other angles, from traditional Zulu culture to modern psychology, to really try and get to the bottom of what happened to Clara. Okay, first things first, we need to understand who Clara was and what exactly kicked this whole thing off. Because before she was the subject of an exorcism, she was just a student living at the mission. So Clara was an orphan. She grew up entirely within this mission system. The clergy there actually described her as Mary and a pretty decent student. But then, right after her first communion in 1906, when she was 16, something shifted. Her behavior started to change in these really dramatic ways that, completely freaked out the nuns and priests. And then came this really pivotal moment. In July of 1906, Clara supposedly confesses to a priest that she'd made a pact with Satan. Now, for the clergy, this was huge. It gave them a framework for everything that was happening. A voluntary invitation, they called it. In their minds, this wasn't just some random illness. It was a spiritual crisis that Clara had brought on herself. So what were the mission staff actually reporting? What did they see and hear? Well, the claims they documented, a lot of which come directly from handwritten accounts from the time, line up almost perfectly with the church's classic criteria for demonic possession. First up, witnesses claimed that Clara, a Zulu girl who had a very basic mission education, could suddenly speak and understand multiple European languages she'd never, ever been taught. The records say she'd answer questions and even mock the priests in these languages that were completely foreign to her. And then there was this. She supposedly knew the hidden sins of the people around her, revealing all these private, personal failings of the staff and other students. I mean, can you just imagine the kind of fear and paranoia that would create? It completely undermined the authority of her caretakers. But then you get to the most startling claim of all, levitation. And according to the accounts, this wasn't something that happened in private. It was reportedly seen by dozens of people, even during a public mass, where she was seen just rising rigidly into the air. So, as you can imagine, the mission was descending into a state of total panic. Clara's behavior was getting more extreme. They reported incredible strength and violence. So the church decided it was time for an official intervention. Now, this is absolutely key. This was not some secret ritual done in a back room. It was a public spectacle performed over 2 days in front of 170 people. This was a statement, both for the church and for the local community. The exorcism itself sounds like it was an intense, physical struggle. According to Father Erasmus's own notes, the entity eventually left, leaving behind this horrible smell, which is a classic detail in these kinds of stories. And for a while, it seemed like Clara was back to her old self. So, case closed, right? Well, not so fast. The priest's interpretation, this idea of demonic possession, it wasn't the only one on the table. To really get the full picture, we have to look outside the walls of the mission. Because for the Zulu people living in that area, Clara's symptoms, the screaming, the strange movements, it might have looked a lot less like a pact with Satan and a lot more like something else, something very familiar from their own culture. And this is where we need to talk about a concept called hayazo. It's a recognized condition in traditional Zulu belief. And what's so fascinating is that many of Clara's symptoms, the wailing, the aggression, this feeling of being pulled, are almost a mirror image of it. It was seen as a kind of spiritual affliction, often linked to witchcraft or enchantment, that affected young women under a lot of stress. So here's the really crucial takeaway here. The church may have been essentially reframing a local experience into its own theological narrative. The exorcism wasn't just about saving Clara's soul. It was a powerful colonial statement, basically showing that their God was stronger than the local spiritual forces. All right, let's jump forward in time. With everything we know now, after more than a century of advances in psychology and psychiatry, how would we look at Clara's story today? Because it gives us a completely different lens. From a modern psychiatric perspective, you wouldn't start with a supernatural explanation. Instead, the analysis would focus intensely on Clara's environment, her personal history, and the incredible pressures she was living under. I mean, just think about her background. She's an orphan, living in a really rigid institution without any family, and on top of that, she's dealing with the stress of having her own culture suppressed. Today, we know those are massive risk factors for a severe mental health crisis. And this is where it gets really fascinating. Modern psychiatry offers a whole range of possible explanations. You've got conditions like dissociative identity disorder, which can be triggered by trauma and could explain the different voices. But look at that last one, mass psychogenic illness. The fact that another girl, Monica, started showing similar symptoms a year later is a classic sign of this. It's where extreme psychological stress starts to manifest as physical symptoms and can literally spread through a closed, high-stress community, like a mission school. So what happened to Clara? Well, after a second exorcism in 1907, she lived a quiet life until she died of heart failure in 1912. But she left behind this incredibly complex legacy and a debate that is very much still alive today. And that leaves us right here with two powerful but completely different narratives. On one side, you have the accounts of over 170 eyewitnesses to events that just seem to defy any natural explanation. But on the other side, you have everything we now understand about trauma, psychology, and the intense pressures of colonialism. You know, maybe in the end, the most important question isn't if she was possessed. Maybe it's about understanding what her terrifying ordeal tells us about the different worlds she was trapped in. Whether you see a battle for a soul or a young mind fracturing under unbearable pressure, Clara's story is still a powerful and deeply unsettling piece of our history.